Pleasure to be here, and today I'm joined with Dunia Joulani. I'm Hany from Google and Dunia from Deloitte. And I wanted to start by saying, we're probably lucky to be in this region. As you might have seen in the short video, it's super audacious to think about 15, 16 years from now, and we realize how audacious it is to think that far. But we did realize that sometimes, even in this travel industry, there are some statistical significance that we can correlate in economic relationships that we can correlate over a longer period of time than even predicting 1 or 2 years ahead. And we wanted to take you through that vision today and speak about how this region in particular is changing. Obviously, we have used lots of data, and we speak about it in a second. But first, we wanted to say, with the expertise of Deloitte, we had built some kind of predictive models and the use of actually artificial intelligence and AI. I'm sure you heard that quite often. But we have been using that because travel industry has been an industry that is led and nourished and fed by data. And this is a kind of data that we wanted to draw the line to get you some insights. In our journey, we have been also working with industry veterans. So think about CEOs of certain groups and companies. There is Raul Gonzalez, who's the CEO of Parcelu Group with 30 years of expertise in the industry. We've got some expertise from Hilton and many, many other brands around the world. Because we wanted to speak and hear from you if we are directionally on the right track or not. And the good news about the travel industry, and this is how I envy all of you, I always see you as a happiness maker, and this will stay for quite some time. I don't know if I can get the clicker, please. Thank you, Dunia. So let me start by saying why Google is quite vested into the travel industry. We obviously wanted to be the friend of the travel industry. We had a very simple mission. When it comes to our users, we are focused on making sure that they get the right information with the right messages and right timing and so on. And for you, when it comes to your part of the story, we wanted to make sure we are also delivering on the solutions that you need to reach those people and speak to them at the right time with the right localization and so on. And this has been true mission for ourselves for forever. In fact, I sometimes think about when you are a happiness maker, this is where Google and the travel industry have something in common. Our mission is usually to delight people. As we speak today, I wanted to take you through the journey of this 2040, and we'll speak about 3 components of let's have a quick outlook. What will happen right away? And let's speak about some of those implications that we will see and what you need to do. And Dunia will take you brilliantly what you need to probably change as you are designing for the future. So let's first speak about okay, how this study came about. We have used data from various data sources since 1970s. This is 50 years of data of studying the global inflows and global mobility and trying to see what is common and what is happening. But this was not really enough because we also needed to even think about many, many data points that are more futuristic. So our study covered 185 countries. That's pretty much all the globe. And we were looking at what is really coming from the recent point of view and even the macro changes within the industry or even the improvements of infrastructures that are happening and even geopolitical considerations and the visa considerations and all of that to ease the mobility. So here is our most interesting first chart. So we found a very strong correlation between the international travelers and international trips and the number of people in the middle class globally. This has been always true. And when we speak about the travel industry as a resilient industry, you can probably look at the chart. It's obviously there are lots of one-offs and some conflicts and some pandemics along the way, but it's always coming back on the same trajectory. So the good news is this industry will be here forever. And when we also looked at the second kind of pattern within the data, we found that number of international travelers will get to double pretty much every 15 years or so. And this was a very interesting wake-up call and even validation of like expecting that by 2040 there will be an additional billion international trips globally added compared to obviously 2019 data, which was like we took it as a little bit of a stable year or a base year, as you always do in your industry in comparisons. Let's speak about like, okay, so what are these kind of like major source markets? So obviously we have seen an additional pattern in our data. There was typically 15 countries globally, or 15 destinations, more or less, are feeding 50% of all international tourists. It has been always the case. There are always 15 countries, take like obviously give or take 49, 48 or whatever. And the shift that is happening in 2040 is like we have noticed like certain destinations that are sticky at the top. Speak about like France. Yes, France has been always number one today. In the future, it will more or less remain number one, but Spain is expected to take the lead a little bit over France. And we have been also seeing new countries joining like the top 15 countries. And guess what? Obviously, there is an implication of when you are speaking about the destination diversity that is happening and where people are interested to go to places, we have noticed a very interesting pattern of like the rise of countries such as Brazil, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates are becoming up there in the ranks. In fact, if you look at it from those kind of source markets that are taking over, we are seeing Japan is actually dropping out of the list. This is kind of a very interesting thing to watch out as it happens. So lots of dynamics when we speak about like the major source markets. But make no mistake about like even India as an example. It's also one of the major kind of destinations. Let's speak about like maybe some of those markets. I think the slides here is slightly confusing. So when we speak about like I think we got confused in two slides here. So we are speaking about like the source markets where like we are seeing a very sticky China at the very top. We are seeing India, and think about like the number of passports and the growth in GDP per capita and even the confidence for people to travel and so on. And this is like the other view where we are seeing the destinations with Saudi and United Arab Emirates and even Indonesia coming along. So if we think about like even where pretty much half of the international travel will take place, it's actually concentrated into 4 key clusters. And one of them is this Middle East cluster, where it's growing its share from the total pie from a 4% only to a 7%. And this is a very interesting dynamic in the region. So let me probably show you a quick one. As we are seeing users using our services today, when we look at the Google searches, we think of it as a barometer of like the demand, of like where people are going and so on. Obviously, we have passed through like a period of like the COVID where like curves were quite funny in shapes, went flat sometimes, went into U shape, went into W shape, went into V shape. But right now, the good news is this is all history. The graphs are coming back to the normal seasonality of predictability that is happening. And we are also noticing is even the angles of the curves are restoring, which is like obviously good news to the stability of the industry and predictions. But when we think about like the travelers, they're becoming even more professionals. So what we have noticed in our data, before people take the purchase decisions of like a hotel, a flight, or tour guide, or whatever, they are actually making more searches before going lower funnel and actually making the reservations and booking. We have seen that when we look at like the number of searches, at least for the first half of the year, outgrowing the number of like visits that we are sending to the industry, which suggests as people are going back and forth, and obviously people are using super long queries now in terms of how they are designing trips before they stick to one single provider when it comes to that, which gives you a little bit of implication. So when we speak about like that kind of professional user, we have noticed pattern where like users are taking more time because they even take more time and they might have a little bit of an anxiety in their decision making than when they, let's say, buy something that is like long-term kind of enduring goods at their homes or sofas or beds or so. I was like, come on, is it just a trip or it's just a flight? But the user is always thinking, did I make the right value for money? So just remember, the user will always be there trying to scrutinize like the options out there. So they are obviously making more considerations now. They are open to try new things and new brands. And for your businesses, you always wanted to wave and raise your hand and say like why you stand out in the crowd as you are speaking to those users. I'll let Dunia continue with the second part of like very interesting readings and implications. Dunia.
Thank you, Hany. Is this the, there we go. Sabah al-khair, good morning, everybody. So thank you, Hany. Hany walked us through some of the data insights that came out of our study. What we want to look at now is the so what, or the implications of those findings. Before we do that, what we want to do is look at the source markets that will shape our future. So there's two trends that we really saw. The existing big fish, let's say, that still look like they're going to be the big fish of tomorrow, and then the big risers. In terms of big fish today, we're seeing China, US, UK, and Germany maintaining their position. And in terms of the big risers for tomorrow, India, Pakistan, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and Mexico. What this really means is that we need to start planning from today for attracting those source markets. If we turn our attention to destinations, what's really interesting is we see some of the bigger markets like Spain, France, and US maintaining their position, and we see Saudi and the UAE from a Middle East perspective making it into the top 15. Saudi, of course, we can't talk about tourism and hospitality in the region without talking about Saudi Arabia. We see significant growth. Travel searches and searches related to Saudi Arabia have gone up over 127% over the last short to medium term in terms of international travel. And this is, of course, in line with all of the government initiatives and the investment going into the tourism sector. We saw international arrivals also significantly increase during that period, not to the same extent, but what would be really interesting to see is once some of these big destinations that have been announced, Neom, Qiddiya, other giga projects, start to materialize to see the impact on then international arrivals. Another big one from the Middle East, the UAE. We see the UAE start to outrank some of the major European destinations, overtaking Portugal as the 11th most searched destination in the world. So this is really the time, again, for all of those source markets and the destinations that we see coming into 2040. This is the time to build or continue showing a brand love. And again, the time is now to launch and iterate, whether it's adopting new technologies, new strategies. Today is really the day to start planning. In terms of implications, there are three areas that I wanted to touch on quickly. I think a lot came out of the study, but just for the sake of time, we wanted to touch quickly on markets, business models, and mechanics. From a markets perspective, it's really important to understand who we're selling to and how. The first area we wanted to touch on is tourism flows transformation. It's really important to find new ways of engaging with those source markets that we just talked about. We see leading up to 2040 that the major source markets like China, US, and India will make up about 30% of total international travel. So how do you cater to these markets? More interestingly, we saw with the numbers with Hany and that I presented earlier, India is expected to achieve 145 million international departures by 2040. And the Indian traveler has specific, let's say, preferences that it's important to cater to. We were talking about this earlier. There's about 10 major languages in India. For each of the languages, there's about 30 million Indians that speak that language, and only about, was it 20%, Hany, we were saying?
25% of Indians are English first, kind of. And this is when we think, at least from the internet population. But like when you see like the numbers for the 10 native dialects that are natural, each one of them have like millions of people, like 30 million people at least in each bucket. So as you are probably, is like Dunia was earlier saying, is like when you launch and iterate, don't assume like all Indian peoples or travelers are the same or speak the same language. And this is kind of an invitation for you to even like use the power of technology as you can. How can I hyper customize or personalize our messages and attraction, or even to kind of stand out in the crowd as you working on your acquisition?
Exactly. And then what we refer to here is the digital and hybrid tsunami is we see that the barriers that were traditionally faced by the emerging traveler no longer exist or have been blurred. A lot of travelers today, when they're doing their research and planning their travel, there's technology that allows or supports them in real time. For example, real-time translation, virtual experiences. We see that a lot of emerging travelers are actually finding new destinations purely through social media. So again, when you're trying to cater to these new source markets, it's really important to understand how you're doing that and through which channels. In terms of business models, we're seeing that sometimes the industry, and maybe increasingly so going forward, is faced by unforeseen circumstances. We saw a couple of years ago, COVID. I'm very happy to never talk about COVID again, but we saw during COVID, again, something completely unpredictable, wasn't planned. And because of situations like that, it's really important to adopt business models that are dynamic and can adapt very quickly to new situations. The new age of algorithms and AI, of course, again, we can't talk about hospitality, the hospitality industry or the tourism industry without talking about AI. And given what's available now from an AI perspective or technology perspective, it's almost critical, it's a must that you adopt these new technologies to be able to gain new consumer insights and be able to make decisions very quickly for your business. Touching on hyper-personalization as well from an AI perspective, being able to cater, and I think we'll come to this on the panel as well, being able to cater to consumers or micro-segmentation as well is really, really important, and AI allows you to do that, not just in real time, but also in a much more cost-effective way. From a mechanics perspective, globalization increases the complexity of managing workforce, but also understanding an ever-evolving source market and destination outlook. So it's really important to understand how to cater to different backgrounds, how to manage different backgrounds, and how to be able to do that across geography. Coming back to AI here, there's understanding consumer preferences on one hand, but also being able to use AI to optimize decisions internally, whether that's revenue management, whether that's being able to do revenue management even at a more specific level. So for example, catering to country of origin as opposed to just at a market level. Finally, I'm from Deloitte, so of course I need to touch on something finance related. From a financial perspective, we're seeing the increase in the number of travelers, or maybe what we can refer to even as the standardization or commoditization of travel, has resulted in a compression of profit margins. So it's really important to understand whether it's from an industry reconfiguration perspective or adopting new business models like subscription-based travel, adopting AI, and these technologies that are available to us. It's really important to understand how to be able to optimize revenue and cost to be able to achieve healthier profit margins. Thank you. This is everything we wanted to touch on today, but please feel free to scan the QR code. It will take you to a link to our study, which will have some of our findings.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Before we start, I have to say Mary Louise and I did not color coordinate on purpose. I think it's probably that team connection that brought it out. But great to have you here. I have to say this is probably one of the most exciting pieces of industry research that I've come across recently, because it's based on such a robust and diverse data set. And most of it is behavioral data, so what people actually do as opposed to what they say they would do. Hany, when this came out, was there anything that really surprised you? Was there anything where you said, oh, I did not see this coming? Or was it more or less aligned with your experience?
I would probably say is like there was some expected ones that we always had like a doubt. Is like everybody speaks, for example, about India and like the rise of India and so on. But like seeing the numbers, and even when we drill down to the implications of India and how like India is growing, that was like a confirmation to what all the industry leaders are thinking about recently. But when we positioned like and we saw like the Middle East, is like it was very interesting when you look primarily from all of the available studies in travel. They always look at historical data in order to draw the line for the future. And by no means you could even see that Saudi Arabia will become not even crawling towards the top, but jumping the ranks. And this was a very interesting confirmation to what like this region is building for. And we're not even considering what they plan to do, but even we were speaking about what they started already doing and the events that are confirmed and so on. So it was a really good delight, and especially to be as part of this region here.
And obviously this research isn't meant to be the crystal ball, right? But it does give us some indication as to the risks and opportunities that destinations could address in the coming years. So, Dunia, who came out as the biggest winner, so to speak, out of this? And what are some of the watch outs for certain destinations that, unless they course correct, they might find themselves perhaps less relevant in the coming decades?
I think probably Saudi was the biggest winner, I would say. Like we mentioned in the presentation, we saw international travel searches concerning Saudi Arabia and the various destinations that have been announced have gone up by 127%. And I think it's really amazing to see what Saudi has done, not only in terms of aligning to the 2030 vision that's been announced, but marketing and branding some of these destinations. I was mentioning this to Hany earlier, actually, just from an anecdotal perspective. As Deloitte, we've been working in Saudi for a number of years, and a few years ago, somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, Dunia, I think I'm thinking of taking my kids to Neom for the National Day holiday." And I was like, "Okay, hang on a second. It hasn't materialized yet." So I think it's really exciting to see that the level of interest internationally has gone up significantly for the region, and I think this is also really important for the Middle East in general because it builds critical mass, right? So people coming to Saudi, people coming to the UAE will likely travel to other areas in the region. Another one I think, Hany, we were talking about was Oman. A lot of emerging travelers are really interested to see what's happening in Oman, especially as a hidden gem in the region. A lot of adventure and nature that's interesting from that perspective. One thing to watch out for, Eva, and again, this is something we were speaking about earlier, we saw that for certain countries, the growth looked somewhat stagnant or stable, I would say. And I think, like you said, this is not a crystal ball, right? This is based on what's happening today in terms of searches and interest. This is what it looks like. But I think especially for the DMOs in the room, it's really important to have a think about, okay, what are we trying to achieve at a destination level? And what do we need to do to potentially change that outcome in the next few years?
Sarah, is that what you see from your data as well? Any destinations that you'd like to highlight as winners or looking good, and then others who could perhaps do with a change in strategy in order to make sure they come out on top?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everybody. I think I'd probably echo what both Hany and Dunia have said. Saudi Arabia is probably the hottest market on the planet, both metaphorically and actually. We were in Saudi this week in Riyadh. The one consideration definitely for Riyadh is traffic, so watch out for that one for sure. It's the fastest growing market from a supply standpoint. With that does come some pain, short term. So short term, as you have, these tens of thousands of rooms entering the market and hundreds of thousands of rooms to come, that can come with some pain in the short term. So that's not a watch out as such, but just a bedding in process. Some of the hottest markets, I think Ras Al Khaimah is definitely one with their newest, we keep calling it attraction pending. So I think that'll be a big driver for Ras Al Khaimah. Obviously, it goes without saying, Dubai and Abu Dhabi. We forecast for Dubai and Abu Dhabi. I can't decide if we're incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, because it just defies logic on a daily, weekly, monthly, etc. basis. And one that we've noticed, especially this year, going back to what Dunia said about Oman, is specifically Salalah. Definitely a hidden gem destination, high on my bucket list in the top 3. Already a 22% increase in demand this year. I think that speaks for itself going into the Salalah market. And candidly, unless you were in this region 10 years ago, or even if you were in this region 10 years ago, I think a lot of us maybe didn't even know where Salalah was. Everyone talked about Oman and Muscat, and they were the 2 markets that were spoken about. So they're definitely, my money would be on Ras Al Khaimah, Salalah in the short term, but short, medium, long term, it's definitely Saudi Arabia across the board.
It's a brilliant destination indeed. Dunia, you've touched on this a little bit, but I feel that as an industry, we're still quite attached to seasonality patterns. And I think John spoke earlier this morning about how our brain likes certainty and predictability. So we still like to stick to a certain extent to our winter sale or our summer sale or our GCC campaign. Do you see both from this research and also Sarah from your data that maybe some of those patterns are going away to an extent, or that we could future-proof ourselves in a way by having more agility and fluidity in how we approach promotions, campaigns, and in general how we think about customer behavior?
I think there's definitely an element of future-proofing. I would say, especially for us in our work in the industry, a lot of our clients are having that discussion. It's about year-round activation, what type of programming, what type of events, and I'm saying even at a DMO or government level, right? So what do we need to do to make the destination attractive all year long? So I think those discussions are really happening, and the future-proofing is really, really important. I think what we saw from the data that was really interesting as well is the different source market preferences. Hany, we were talking about this earlier. India, for example, showed a 50-day travel time between, as Hany put it, dreaming and then actually traveling,
Landing.
comparing to an average of 70 globally. So I think also depending on the source market, I think, like we said earlier, right, adopting the kinds of technologies that allow you to work on a micro-segmentation level and understand what source markets am I trying to attract, and what do I need to do to attract them, while also future-proofing. But I'm sure, Sarah, you're also seeing a lot of this from an SDR.
Yeah, for sure. The future-proofing piece is interesting, and the seasonality piece is definitely interesting. This part of the world is notorious for short lead time. So I have also bought into that. I've more often than I care to admit, have sat in the car and booked the hotel that I'm staying in that night. You would never do that in Europe, just categorically not. But I think the seasonality, certainly in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi's been a huge success story in the last 12 to 18 months post-COVID, as that COVID business kind of, the COVID business that was never going to remain, especially the medical business. The seasonality piece has got shorter. We now describe, especially Dubai and Abu Dhabi in particular, as either being high occupancy or very high occupancy. So they're the two kind of occupancies you see. I think the summer season has become slightly more contracted than it was, which is probably good for you all in the room to hear. So yeah, I think seasonality though in Europe still remains. We definitely have seen and continue to see in the UK or in Ireland where the season starts sooner. and it lasts for longer. So in Ireland, where I'm obviously from, it used to start around St. Patrick's Day, so the middle of March, and it used to basically finish as soon as half term took place in October. It now starts kind of mid-February, so let's call it a month earlier, and it runs right through to the middle of November. So that summer season, or that kind of peak stroke shoulder season is much longer, and the low season is much shorter.
If you allow me also, Eva, like there is also destination seasonality. So for this particular region, think about Ramadan. And Ramadan, usually you guys like would know it much better in terms of like number and how like the slow kind of inflows would come. But do you realize that Ramadan 2031 will be starting around like the same time of Christmas? Which is a very interesting for you to think about, like how to even think 6 years from now about how are you matching and rebranding yourself as an attraction for Ramadan, because this will become like a habit where people will come and literally spend 30 days of Christmas in this region. So it's completely different dynamic that is happening. But yes, the users or the travelers are dreaming, thinking, considering. There are like shifts, there are some predictability, but you need to allow for those also like special seasonalities that comes to this particular region.
Since you touched on customer journey, and we know in our industry that's always been complicated, right? And people have so many different touch points. I think on average it used to be 25 before they would even settle on a destination, right? So for us as marketers, figuring out what that journey is and how do we show up has always been a challenge. Now, if you add the AI to that, right, and the fact that some of that travel search is shifting to Gemini or ChatGPT or other tools that are or other tools that are coming, right? That are a bit of a black box for us as marketers, because we don't necessarily know what the journey was there and
Right.
how did these recommendations come through. So how do we as marketers get ahead of that and make sure that we still do have some level of control over how our brands and destinations show up?
Thank you for the question. I think it's like I often get this kind of questions, and let's speak about it from two angles. First, from like the travelers, people, you and I, is like now we are exploring, and this is what we are seeing in data. It's like people don't really have to do those 25 websites to kind of get a decision, but now we are seeing significantly very long queries. It's like design, let's say, 15-day trip to Dubai in that particular season, and I want to do a road trip, and I want to visit vegetarian places around the corner. This is a single query. And then the AI of like ChatGPT, Gemini, and many others are now able to somehow respond in a way to give suggestions to those like users and consumers. Let's make sure, like whenever we speak about the Gen AR or generative AI, sometimes they make things that are very persuasible. So you are kind of, looks like plausible and like comprehensive, very well articulated, but you still need to like consider what's in it. So even as a user, they are still like questioning if like the AI got it right 100% or there is kind of a hallucination in between. Let's speak about like from a supplier point of view, all of you. It's like, we are shifting between 3 phases now, and luckily it's going very fast. So from wow, and what is that AI, to like maybe how can we use it and how can we embed it and so on, to almost now, so what can I do now? And the AI is not like an enemy or a replacement and to marketers. In fact, it's you are, as a marketer, competing with other marketers that are using the AI. So you need to, for all of you, need to start like getting used to how to optimize your presence and digital presence, and in order to get into like telling the stories for people as they are searching for you. So it will be a major shift, and I'm glad that we are living this era as we speak.
Very, very interesting times indeed. I think being a marketer 50, 60 years ago was probably much simpler, where you had a limited number of channels, one-way messaging. Now, again, to your point, lots of things to consider in how we show up and how we talk about our brands. The other thing that came out of this research, and I don't think it's a new concept, but we see that the growth of our industry is strongly correlated with the growth of the middle class. At the same time, especially in this region, we have a very strong emphasis on luxury, probably more so than many other places. We hear about luxury pipeline, luxury landscape. We hear about brands trying to reach out to all those high net worth individuals. How do we reconcile the two? And there's probably place for both, but how do we capitalize on what's really the majority of the driving force for travel? And Sarah can perhaps as well share some insights when it comes to the pipeline and the landscape of the region.
I'll probably let Sarah, like she has all the numbers.
That was nicely dodged, Hany, well done. Yeah, I think if we look historically, like if we look across the GCC, the favorite asset class is still luxury. Over the last 10 years, from a compound annual growth rate, it's about 7% growth every year in luxury. If you look at the other asset classes, it's kind of 4 or 5%, and the budget economy, or mid-scale economy, should I call it, those two asset classes, it's kind of 2 to 3%. So we still lean towards more of the luxury side of things. There's lots of these isms kind of floating around: affordable luxury, budget luxury. I've heard all kinds of marketing, you know much more about this, Eva, than I do, but all kinds of marketing around what is luxury and what's the expectation of a mid-market traveller and the expectation of what you're going to receive in return. So, pipeline-wise, like I said, we were in Riyadh area this week, and kind of Saudi in general, but Riyadh specifically is more like kind of 4 to 5% in the luxury upper upscale, and then the 3 to 4%. So it seems to be a slightly different strategy, that there's more of the still luxury, still the upper upscale, and the upscale's coming in, but it's a flatter growth rate. And into the future, it's a similar luxury, still the leader, but definitely there's a little bit more increase in those kind of middle classes. Maybe not so much on the budget economy, but definitely on the upper mid-scale and mid-scale brands, for sure.
Any thoughts around, again, understanding the customer, understanding the intent, because that's something that Google really is a champion at. And when I think about any of us, we could be both luxury and mid-scale customers at different points in our life, or
Right.
during a different time of the year, depending why and where we're traveling.
Right.
How do we get to the bottom of that intent without generalizing and putting people in large segmentation groups, which I think it's something that we as marketers can be guilty of, because it's
Right.
easier for us to say, oh, you're a luxury and you're not. But how do we get to the bottom of that intent for each single trip?
Probably there are a couple of things. So since COVID, we are now seeing a pattern of people literally taking a little bit of like the 4 or 5 star kind of category and services that they want to pamper themselves for. Let's go back to obviously the essence of travel. People are not traveling because they want to go from A to B, but they need to be at B to enjoy certain kind of experiences. And this is where like you probably need to index for, because like you need to understand, or like as you are offering those, like let's say spa services or amazing restaurants or cultural, and you need to make sure you position those. And we have seen, for example, in Ras Al Khaimah, you might even have better numbers about like the Indian weddings and how like this is a major event, and people come in really large number of people. Yes, it's kind of like a nice luxurious destination or a resort or so, but like people are spending more for life moments, events, to enjoy experiences. So don't shy away of like probably trying to get one specific person in mind. No, sometimes people are really saving hard to get and enjoy those kind of luxury experiences or events or so. So my advice is like, obviously, don't be shy to make mistakes. I think back in the old days of marketing, it's like, okay, here is the brief, here is the target set, here is we need, I don't know, people from 25 to 40 or 50, whatever kind of age group in this country, in this seasonality, I think now you can cater for more seasonalities and more people and more of the Gen Z around the world. And the good news about travel is your source market is literally the whole world. It's not specific to one particular market.
Yeah, that's a very good advice. And again, getting to the bottom of that intent for every particular trip really really matters. One thing that's very close to my heart, it's about people and capabilities, right? Because any sort of future proofing and the future consideration cannot be done without thinking about people of the future. And I think for most of us being here in the commercial function, what sort of skill set do you think revenue managers, salespeople, marketers will need going forward? And where do we find those people? Again, I think as an industry, we can sometimes be guilty of hiring from a very limited pool of people. We want someone who can hit the ground running. But is that really the best approach? Or where can we source, where can we look for the skill set that will be useful going forward?
I think we need to, I guess, not shy away, like you said, from hiring people that are maybe have the right, Eva, we were talking about this earlier, the right fundamentals, but then you can help train and support them on that journey. I think we are seeing a lot of new education programs here through partnerships with the likes of Glion, Les Roches, some of these big schools, which is amazing. And I think that goes a long way in terms of bringing that into the Middle East and helping people here get trained up and entering into the industry. But I also think it's really important, like I said, to find people maybe with the right fundamentals and help train them along that journey, as opposed to looking for somebody with a very specific skill set. I think the other thing is the industry is probably evolving much faster than it has in the past, and the tools that you're using today are probably very different than the tools you would have used in the past. So maybe thinking outside of the box a little and going to people who are maybe more on the tech side or the digital side and have that kind of experience, and partnering with them or bringing them into your business, and it becomes an educational experience both ways, right? They learn the way that you do things, and you learn a new way of potentially doing things. So I would say, yeah, probably not shying away from thinking outside the box a little, as opposed to looking for people with that very traditional skill set from a commercial perspective.
Hany, what do you look for in people in addition to the core skills that are linked to a particular role? What other qualities do you want them to have?
Did we say AI enough today?
I'm sure we'll hear it a couple of more times.
No, I think being like up to date on the technology, and it's like I always find the travel industry, it's a slow industry, but it's a fast market. Whenever I speak about the market, I'm speaking about actually the end consumer that is coming. And when I speak about the slow industry, I'm actually speaking about suppliers. So long ago, when I used to go check-in many years ago. I used to go to check-in. I have my iPhone or Android, amazing. It's like I know a lot of things about the travel, the flights, the aircraft type, and so on, and whether it arrived or not, it delayed or not. While the check-in agent, the poor guy, is like still doing like those like little codes and so on. And this has been like working forever. And you have like a little bit of within the industry resilience to change and update those kind of systems. So for sure, getting up to date into matching like the end consumer speed is absolutely required. And other things that comes to my mind is like when technology is there. This was like probably a call that Dunia was making. Like when you kind of launch and iterate, you need to empower people with like the concept of like it's okay sometimes to not get it perfectly right, but it's important to try and learn and so on. So the empowerment is a second thing. And speaking of empowerment, the very last thing that I have noticed and personally in being involved in is sometimes gender diversity within the industry. When you know, like at this industry at large, only like a very small number, a single-digit number, is like the head of or CEO of like major travel companies, the fortunate 100 travel companies globally. And if you go even lower to the composition of boards, it's like 30% or even less. I'm obviously not speaking about the frontline people or housekeeping. I'm just speaking about the empowerment at the leadership. If you zoom into this particular region, there will be a massive hiring spree to match the demand that is coming in Saudi, in Oman, and UAE, and all of these places. So you need to solve and design for that by nature. And just remember, who here would agree about this amazing stat? 80% of the travel money coming to the travel industry is actually influenced by women. My wife would design the trip. Obviously, like we have our preferences and so on, but she can decide whether to take this experience or that experience, that time or that time, how long, and so on. So just like make sure as you are empowering your people and breed and even recruit for the future, you solve those things systematically with a good pipeline today.
Great messages. Sarah, any last thoughts from you?
Well, I'd just like to point out that, Hany, you are outnumbered in this stage today. Just thought that was very important to point out. So great gender diversity going on here. I would totally agree with what both Dunia and Hany have said. I don't think it's about hiring the person that has everything, that checks all the boxes on a piece of paper. I think personality is a huge thing. Flexibility, adaptability. Be a nice person and you'll go really far in this industry. Just be a nice human being and you will go really far.
Wonderful advice. Thank you so much. Obviously, the slides we've seen today are just a very brief highlight of the study. If you want to explore additional insights, they are available, so please feel free to do so. Okay. Thank you all for joining me today on the stage.
Thank you, Eva. Thanks, everyone.